I arrived at the remote property in northern Wisconsin late in the afternoon. The keys trembled in my hands as I tried to fit the right one into the front door lock. It took 3 attempts before the tumblers finally clicked. "Come on," I muttered to myself, pushing the door open with a drawn-out creak. The 2-story house stood surrounded by thick pine trees cutting stark silhouettes against the dimming sky. Everything about the place screamed neglect. Weathered siding peeled away in strips, and several shutters hung at awkward angles or had fallen off completely. My Uncle Robert hadn't been much for home maintenance, apparently. Inside wasn't much better. Dust particles swirled and danced in what remained of the daylight that managed to filter through the grimy windows. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I stepped fully into the entryway, letting my duffel bag slip from my shoulder to the floor. I pulled out the handwritten note from my pocket, unfolding it for what must have been the 20th time since I'd found it with the will. Uncle Robert's handwriting was surprisingly neat for a man who'd lived alone in the woods for the last 20 years of his life. 6 rules, I said aloud, my voice sounding too loud in the empty house. Just 6 rules to follow while staying here. The note was simple and direct. 1. Lock all doors and windows before dark. 2. Keep the radio on at all times during the night. 3. If the radio cuts out, unplug it immediately. Wait 5 minutes, then plug it back in. 4. Do not look out the windows after dark. 5. Do not open the door for anyone or anything, no matter what you hear. 6. If you find a note inside the house that you didn't write, burn it immediately without reading it. I'd thought they were the paranoid ramblings of an old hermit when I first read them. Now, standing in this hollow, empty house as daylight faded, I wasn't so sure. I tucked the note back into my pocket and grabbed my bag. There would be time to unpack later. Right now, I needed to follow rule number 1. Starting with the front door, I moved through the house systematically. Every window, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, got checked twice. I made sure each latch was secure, testing them with a firm tug. The back door had an old deadbolt that took some muscle to turn fully. Upstairs, I found 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. The master bedroom seemed the most lived in, with books stacked beside the bed and a flannel shirt still hanging on the back of a chair. This had been my uncle's room. I closed the door, deciding to sleep in one of the guest rooms instead. By the time I finished securing the house, twilight had deepened into darkness. I fumbled for light switches as I made my way back downstairs, illuminating the house one room at a time. The yellow glow of aged bulbs did little to chase away the shadows that gathered in corners. In the kitchen, I found the radio my uncle had mentioned, an old model sitting on the counter next to the refrigerator. I plugged it in, turning the dial until it crackled to life. Static-filled country music filled the silence, some twangy song about lost love and empty highways. I made myself a simple dinner from the supplies I'd brought with me, a sandwich and an apple, and sat at the kitchen table. The house creaked and settled around me, making noises that might have been normal for an old structure but still set me on edge. Then the tapping began. It started soft, so faint I almost didn't hear it over the radio, like fingernails against glass, coming from the living room window. My sandwich stopped halfway to my mouth. I gripped the note in my pocket tighter, forcing myself to stay seated at the kitchen table. Rule number 4. Do not look out the windows after dark. The radio signal started cutting out, the country music dissolving into bursts of static. I remembered Rule 3 and quickly yanked the plug from the wall outlet. 5 minutes. I had to wait 5 minutes. The tapping grew more insistent, no longer confined to the living room window. It moved, traveling around the house from window to window. Front of the house, then the side, then somewhere upstairs. It wasn't random. It was searching, testing each possible entry point. My watch ticked through what felt like the longest 5 minutes of my life. The tapping continued its circuit of the house, growing louder with each pass. When the time was finally up, I plugged the radio back in with shaking hands. The music returned immediately, clear as day. Some upbeat tune now, with fiddle and guitar. The tapping stopped. Just like that, complete silence except for the radio. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and slumped back in the chair. I stayed at the kitchen table for hours, afraid to move, afraid to turn off the radio, afraid to do anything that might bring back whatever had been tapping at my windows. The house continued to creak occasionally, but those sounds were different. Natural, not searching. The hands on my watch crawled toward midnight, then pushed past it into the early hours of morning. My back ached from sitting upright for so long, and my eyes burned with fatigue, but I didn't dare go upstairs to bed. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. The first rays of sunlight broke through the kitchen window, casting long shadows across the table where I'd spent the entire night. My neck ached from sitting upright for so many hours, and my eyes burned from lack of sleep. But I'd made it through to morning. I stood up, stretching my stiff limbs, and walked to the window. The yard looked normal in the daylight. Overgrown grass, pine trees swaying gently in the morning breeze, birds flitting between branches. Nothing lurking, nothing watching, nothing tapping. The radio still played softly in the background, some morning talk show now. I turned the volume down but left it on as I made my way to the coffee maker. It was an old model but functional. I needed caffeine desperately after the night I'd just had. As I waited for the coffee to brew, something caught my eye on the kitchen counter, a folded piece of paper that definitely hadn't been there the night before. My name was written across the front in neat, familiar handwriting. Uncle Robert's handwriting. My stomach dropped. Rule number 6 echoed in my mind. If you find a note inside the house that you didn't write, burn it immediately without reading it. I stared at the paper for several seconds, curiosity and fear battling within me. The coffee maker gurgled behind me, but I barely heard it. What could my dead uncle possibly need to tell me? What warnings or explanations might be inside? But I remembered the tapping, the searching. Whatever had circled this house last night was real, and Uncle Robert's rules had kept me safe. I turned away from the coffee and rummaged through the kitchen drawers until I found a box of matches. With shaking hands, I picked up the folded paper by its corner, careful not to open it or glimpse anything inside. I carried it to the sink, struck a match, and touched the flame to the corner of the paper. The fire caught quickly, eating away at my name first. I held the burning note over the sink as orange flames consumed it, turning the white paper black and then to ash. Smoke curled upward, filling my nostrils with the acrid smell of burning paper. When it became too hot to hold, I dropped the last corner into the sink and turned on the water, washing the remnants down the drain. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched the last bits of ash disappear. Had I done the right thing? What if it contained important information? But deep down, I knew following the rules was more important than satisfying my curiosity. The coffee finished brewing, and I poured myself a large cup, adding sugar and the powdered creamer I'd brought with me. The normalcy of the action felt jarring after what had just happened. I took my coffee to the front porch, stepping outside for the first time since I'd arrived. The morning air was cool and crisp, filling my lungs and clearing my head. Birds chirped in the surrounding trees, and somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker hammered away at a trunk. It was hard to believe that just hours ago, I'd been paralyzed with fear inside. After finishing my coffee, I decided to explore the property while I had daylight. I needed to know what I was dealing with, and being cooped up in the house wasn't going to provide answers. The yard extended about 50 yards in each direction before the pine trees took over. A gravel path led from the back door through what must have once been a garden, now wildly overgrown with weeds. I followed it, keeping my eyes open for anything unusual. Behind the house, the property sloped gently downward. I could see a small shed about 100 yards away, its wooden walls weathered to a silvery gray. I made a mental note to check it out later, but decided to walk the perimeter of the yard first. As I rounded the corner of the house, I noticed a small basement window at ground level, its glass grimy with years of dirt. So there was a basement. I remembered seeing a door in the hallway yesterday that I assumed led below, but I'd avoided opening it. Something about the way it sat in the wall, slightly crooked, had made me uneasy. I continued my circuit of the property, studying the tree line and taking mental notes of the layout. The place was bigger than I'd initially thought, with the driveway stretching nearly a quarter mile back to the main road. It was as I reached the far corner of the yard that I saw it, a dark figure standing perfectly still between the pine trees. I caught it from the corner of my eye, just a silhouette against the deeper shadows of the forest. My heart jumped into my throat, but I forced myself to keep walking, to maintain my casual pace. Rule number 4 had specified not looking out windows after dark, but something told me I shouldn't acknowledge this figure either, day or night. I pretended I hadn't seen anything, keeping my gaze fixed on the ground in front of me, though every instinct screamed for me to run or at least look directly at whatever was watching me. I could feel its attention, a physical weight against my skin. Instead, I knelt down, pretending to examine a cluster of wildflowers growing at the edge of the yard. My hands trembled as I picked one, twirling it between my fingers while fighting the urge to look up. I continued my walk, making my way back toward the house at the same measured pace. Only when I reached the front porch did I allow myself to glance back toward where I'd seen the figure. Nothing. The space between the trees stood empty. I went back inside, locking the door behind me even though it was still morning. My uncle's rules specified securing the house before dark, but after what I'd just seen, I wasn't taking any chances. Over the next few hours, I tried to busy myself with unpacking and cleaning. The house needed it badly. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs hung in corners and across light fixtures. I found cleaning supplies under the kitchen sink and started there, working my way outward. Every so often, I'd glance out a window toward the spot where I'd seen the figure, but it never reappeared. At least, not in the same place. Around 2 in the afternoon, I was wiping down the living room windows when movement caught my eye again. This time, the dark silhouette stood at the edge of the driveway, closer to the house than before. I quickly turned away, heart pounding, and moved to another room. By 4 o'clock, dark clouds had rolled in, casting premature shadows across the yard. I decided to secure the house early, checking and rechecking every window and door. The radio remained on in the kitchen, playing softly in the background as I worked. I made myself a simple dinner from my dwindling supplies, making a mental note to drive into town for groceries tomorrow. As I ate at the kitchen table, I realized I'd need to sleep eventually. The idea of spending another night in the chair made my already sore back throb in protest. After washing my dishes, I gathered blankets and pillows from the guest room where I'd left my bags. I arranged them on the living room couch, positioning myself so I could see both the front door and the hallway leading to the basement door. The radio sat on the coffee table, volume turned up just enough to fill the room with sound. Darkness fell completely by 8. And I turned on every light in the house, creating pools of yellow warmth to push back against the pressing night. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the pine trees and occasionally gusting hard enough to make the house creak and moan. I tried reading one of the paperbacks I'd found on a shelf, but couldn't focus on the words. Instead, I found myself listening to the radio, to the wind, to the house settling around me, waiting for something to happen. By 11, my eyelids drooped heavily despite my anxiety. I fought to stay awake, pinching my arm whenever I caught myself nodding off. But the sleepless night before was catching up with me. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight, startling me fully awake. For a moment, everything seemed normal. The radio played an old rock song, the wind continued its lonely howl outside, and the house creaked occasionally as old houses do. Then I heard it. A dull thud from the hallway, followed by a rattling sound. I sat up straight, fully alert now, my gaze fixed on the hallway entrance. Another thud, louder this time. The basement door. Something was trying to get through from below. The rattling grew more violent, the entire door shaking in its frame. Wood splintered around the hinges as whatever was on the other side pushed against it. I pulled my feet up onto the couch, as if the thing might slither out across the floor and grab my ankles. The radio signal cut out suddenly, the rock song dissolving into static. I remembered Rule 3 and lunged for it, yanking the plug from the wall. The static died, leaving only the sound of the basement door being battered against its frame. 5 minutes. I had to wait 5 minutes before plugging it back in. I counted the seconds in my head, trying to stay calm as the pounding against the basement door continued. 1 minute passed. 2. The door frame cracked, wood splintering further. 3 minutes. 4. The rattling paused suddenly, and for a moment I thought it was over. Then came the scratching. Long, deliberate scrapes against the wood, like claws or fingernails dragging slowly down the length of the door. The sound raised goosebumps on my arms and sent a chill down my spine. 5 minutes. I plugged the radio back in with trembling hands, and music immediately filled the room. A classical piece this time, violin and piano. The scratching stopped. I slumped back onto the couch, trying to slow my racing heart. Whatever was down there, the radio seemed to keep it at bay. I had no idea why, but I was grateful. My relief was short-lived. Less than an hour later, the radio signal died again, cutting to static mid-song. I repeated the process, unplugging, waiting 5 agonizing minutes as the basement door rattled and shook, then plugging it back in. And again, just after 3 in the morning. Each time, the attacks on the basement door grew more violent, the wood splintering further until I could see cracks running the length of it from across the room. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn, I was a wreck, exhausted, terrified, jumping at every sound. The radio played steadily now, and the basement door had been quiet for the past hour. I started to think I might make it to full daylight when I heard it, a voice, soft and plaintive, coming from upstairs. "Emily." I froze, my breath catching. The voice was familiar, too familiar. "Emily, please, help me." Uncle Robert's voice, coming from the guest room upstairs. "I'm trapped up here, please, Emily." I knew rule number 5. Do not open the door for anyone or anything, no matter what you hear. But this wasn't the door. It was upstairs, and it sounded exactly like my uncle, the same gentle tone he'd used when I was a child visiting during summers. "Emily, I need you. Please come upstairs." My hands shook as I stood up from the couch. Part of me wanted to respond, to call out, to ask how this was possible. But another part, the part that had seen the figure in the woods and heard the basement door nearly break from its hinges, knew better. The voice called again, more insistent this time. "Emily, hurry, before it's too late." Without hesitation, I grabbed my car keys from the coffee table and ran for the front door. I didn't look back, didn't stop to grab my bags or phone. I just ran, fumbling with the locks, throwing the door open and sprinting to my car parked in the driveway. The engine started on the first try, and I backed out so quickly the tires spun on gravel. As I sped down the long driveway, I glanced in my rearview mirror. A figure stood in the doorway of the house, watching me go. Even at this distance, I could tell it wasn't my uncle. I kept driving, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, putting as much distance between myself and that house as possible. I spent the night huddled in my car at the end of the long driveway, as far from the house as I could get while still being on the property. Sleep came in short bursts, between startling awake at every rustle of leaves or crack of branches in the surrounding woods. The cramped position left my neck stiff and my back aching. I kept the engine running for hours, the heater fighting against the chill that seemed to seep through the windows, until worry about my gas tank forced me to shut it off. Morning arrived with painful slowness. Sunlight broke through my windshield, warming my face and pulling me from another bout of fitful sleep. I sat up straight, wincing at the stiffness in my joints, and looked toward the house in the distance. It stood quiet and still in the morning light, looking almost normal, just an old, neglected property in need of care. Nothing about its weathered exterior suggested the horrors I'd experienced inside. My stomach growled, reminding me that I'd left without any of my supplies. My phone was still on the coffee table, my wallet in my duffel bag. I had nothing but my car keys and the clothes I wore. Despite every instinct telling me to drive away and never come back, I knew I needed to return. Not just for my belongings, but because running away wouldn't solve anything. If I left now, I'd spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, wondering what had been in that house, what had used my uncle's voice, what had tried to get through that basement door. I started the car and drove slowly back up the gravel driveway, eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The forest stood peaceful in the morning light, birds calling to one another among the pines. When I reached the house, I parked close to the front door and sat for several minutes, gathering my courage. The front door stood open exactly as I'd left it in my panicked flight. With cautious steps, I approached the porch, pausing at the threshold to listen. Silence greeted me. No creaking floorboards, no scratching at the basement door, no voice calling my name. I stepped inside, immediately spotting my phone and wallet on the coffee table. The radio sat silent beside them, still plugged in where I'd left it. The blankets I'd arranged on the couch were partially on the floor, evidence of my hasty departure. The basement door hung crooked in its frame, the wood splintered around the hinges just as I remembered. But it remained closed. I collected my phone first, shoving it into my pocket. My duffel bag still sat in the guest room upstairs, but I wasn't ready to venture up there yet. Not after what I'd heard last night. Instead, I went to the kitchen and drank water straight from the tap, realizing how thirsty I was. My reflection in the window above the sink looked haggard, dark circles under my eyes, hair tangled from sleeping in the car, clothes rumpled. After my immediate needs were met, a new determination took hold. I needed answers. Uncle Robert had lived in this house for 20 years. He'd known what was happening here. His rules had kept him safe. There had to be more information somewhere. I began searching through the downstairs rooms methodically, looking for anything that might explain the strange occurrences. The living room yielded nothing but old books and dusty knickknacks. The small study off the main hallway contained outdated bills and random paperwork, but nothing about the house's secrets. Eventually, I worked up the courage to go upstairs. The staircase creaked under my weight as I climbed slowly, listening for any sound that might suggest I wasn't alone. Silence hung heavy around me. The guest room where I'd left my bag was undisturbed. I grabbed it, relieved to have clean clothes and basic necessities again, but didn't linger. The real answers would be in my uncle's room. His bedroom door was closed just as I'd left it yesterday. I pushed it open slowly, holding my breath. Sunlight streamed through partially drawn curtains, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. The flannel shirt still hung on the chair back. The bed remained neatly made with a faded quilt pulled tight across it. A heavy oak desk sat against one wall, its surface organized with precision. Pens lined up, a desk calendar open to the current month, a small lamp positioned just so. This had been my uncle's sanctuary, his private space. I sat in the desk chair, feeling like an intruder. The top drawer contained only standard office supplies, paper clips, rubber bands, sticky notes. The second drawer held various receipts and instruction manuals for appliances throughout the house. It was the bottom drawer that refused to open at first. I tugged harder, feeling something catch, then release. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its edges worn from years of handling. My uncle's name was written on the first page in the same neat handwriting as the rules he'd left me. My hands trembled slightly as I lifted the journal from the drawer. This was what I'd been looking for, the explanation for everything that had happened. The early entries described my uncle's move to the property after inheriting it from his own father. He wrote about renovations, gardening plans, the peace he found in the isolated location, normal things. Then, about 6 months in, the tone changed. He began writing about strange noises at night, feelings of being watched when he walked the property line, shadows that moved on their own among the trees. The next entry detailed the first appearance of the figure in the woods, a dark silhouette that stood perfectly still, watching the house. My uncle's neat handwriting described rules he began creating for himself, the same 6 rules he'd left for me. Each new entry confirmed the necessity of following them strictly. As I flipped through the pages spanning years of my uncle's life, I realized that what I'd experienced wasn't new. He'd been living this nightmare for decades, each night a test of survival. One passage caught my attention, dated from 5 years ago. The tapping returned last night, more insistent than before. The radio cut out 3 times, each interruption longer than the last. Something has changed. It's getting stronger, more determined. I wonder how long the rules will hold. And another, from just 2 years ago. Found another note on the kitchen table this morning. Burned it without reading, as always. The temptation grows stronger each time. What message is it trying to deliver? What lies would it tell to trick me into breaking the agreement? The most recent entry was dated just a week before his death. The figure in the woods stands closer to the house each day. 20 years I've kept it at bay, but I feel my strength waning. I've left instructions for Emily. The property will pass to her. I hope she understands the importance of the rules. I hope she's stronger than I've been. My stomach tightened as I read my name. Uncle Robert hadn't randomly chosen me as his heir. He deliberately passed this burden to me, believing I could handle it. But handle what, exactly? The journal entries made it clear he'd been trying to contain something, not just avoid it. The afternoon sun slanted lower through the window as I continued reading, absorbing years of my uncle's experiences in hours. His writing grew more fragmented in the final entries, his typically neat handwriting occasionally breaking into jagged scrawls across the page. Eventually, I set the journal aside and moved to the window, needing to stretch my legs and process what I'd learned. As I gazed out across the yard, my breath caught. The figure stood at the edge of the property, a dark silhouette against the tree line, exactly as my uncle had described. In my distraction, I'd made a crucial mistake. I looked directly at it. Our eyes met. I couldn't make out its features from this distance, but I felt the connection like a physical jolt. It knew I could see it. And then, it began walking toward the house. My first instinct was to run again, to flee to my car and drive away. But something in my uncle's journal stopped me. Running hadn't solved anything last night. It wouldn't solve anything now. Instead, I backed away from the window, moving quickly through the house, turning off every light as I went. The figure moved with deliberate slowness, but its intent was clear. It was coming for me. I crouched behind the kitchen counter, clutching the journal to my chest. The last rays of sunlight faded outside, plunging the house into darkness. I fumbled for the radio on the counter, turning it on. Static filled the kitchen, but I turned the volume down low. I needed to hear what was happening outside. Footsteps circled the house, slow, measured, testing. They paused at each window, each door. The tapping began just as it had the previous nights, but different now, harder, more insistent. Not fingernails against glass, but knuckles, then fists. The pounding moved around the house in a circuit, growing more violent with each pass. The kitchen window rattled in its frame. I pressed myself closer to the cabinets, trying to make myself smaller. The radio static suddenly cut out. I remembered Rule 3 and quickly unplugged it, beginning my count of 5 minutes. When I plugged it back in, nothing happened. No music, no static, just silence. I tried again, unplugging, waiting, plugging back in. Nothing. The rule wasn't working anymore. The pounding intensified, now so violent that I feared the windows would shatter. Something struck the front door hard enough to make the entire house shudder. Then, silence. I held my breath, straining to hear any movement. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then came a sound that made my blood run cold. A loud crack from the hallway as the basement door burst open, wood splintering and hinges tearing from the wall. Heavy footsteps on the basement stairs coming up. In a moment of panic-fueled clarity, I remembered something from my uncle's journal, a passage about a hiding place, the pantry. He'd reinforced it somehow, made it safer than the rest of the house. I scrambled across the kitchen floor, still clutching the journal, and pulled open the pantry door. Inside was small but deep, with shelves lining both walls filled with canned goods and dry staples. I slipped inside, pulling the door closed behind me just as the basement door crashed the rest of the way open. Something moved into the hallway. I could hear its breathing, ragged, wet sounds that no human could make. The footsteps were heavy, deliberately slow, searching. I pressed my back against the pantry wall, trying to control my breathing. The journal in my hands seemed to burn with importance. My uncle had survived for 20 years. There had to be a way out of this. But as the footsteps moved closer to the kitchen, as a shadow passed across the crack beneath the pantry door, I wondered if I'd already made too many mistakes. I'd looked at the figure. I'd broken one of the rules, and now it was inside. I stayed hidden in the pantry until the first light of dawn seeped through the small window above the highest shelf. My body ached from crouching in the same position for hours, and my throat felt raw from holding back screams every time the footsteps passed near my hiding place. The sounds had been unlike anything I'd ever heard, heavy and dragging, sometimes accompanied by a wet, rattling breath that made my skin crawl. Whatever had broken through the basement door had spent the night searching methodically through every room, moving furniture, opening closets, as if looking for something specific, or someone. As morning light strengthened, the footsteps and breathing gradually faded until the house fell into an unnatural silence. I remained frozen in place, counting each minute, terrified that movement would give away my position. 1 hour passed, then another. The silence held. Finally, when sunlight fully illuminated the kitchen beyond the pantry door, I gathered my courage and slowly turned the knob. The door creaked softly as I eased it open and peered out. The kitchen was a mess. Drawers had been pulled out and emptied onto the floor. Cabinet doors hung open. The table had been shoved against the wall. But what made my stomach clench was the trail of mud and something darker, something that looked like tar, smeared across the tile floor in long, uneven streaks. I stepped out cautiously, clutching Uncle Robert's journal to my chest. The tracks led from the hallway, circled the kitchen, then moved back toward the living room. Taking a deep breath, I followed them. The living room was in similar disarray. Cushions thrown from the couch, bookshelves emptied, lamps knocked over. The mud tracks continued up the stairs. I hesitated at the bottom step, listening for any sound from above, but the house remained silent except for the normal creaking of old wood settling. Slowly, I climbed the stairs, testing each one before putting my full weight on it. When I reached the top landing, I saw that the guest room door stood wide open. My duffel bag had been dumped out, clothes scattered across the floor. The The closet door had been torn from its hinges. I checked my uncle's room next. The bed had been stripped, the mattress slashed open. His desk drawers hung open and empty. Whatever had been in the house had searched thoroughly. Back downstairs, I stood in the middle of the destroyed living room, trying to make sense of what had happened. The front door remained closed and locked. The windows were intact. The only sign of entry was the splintered basement door, now hanging crookedly from a single hinge. My stomach growled, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. Despite my fear, I needed food. I picked my way back to the kitchen, thinking I might find something in the pantry I could eat without preparation. That's when I saw it. Uncle Robert's journal lay open on the kitchen table, not where I had left it. I was certain I'd been holding it when I hid in the pantry. My heart raced as I approached the table. The journal was open to a page I hadn't read before, somewhere near the middle. I looked around once more, checking every corner of the kitchen before sitting down to read what had been deliberately left for me to find. October 15th, 1994. I broke one of my own rules today. The figure has been standing closer to the house each day for weeks. This morning I saw it from the upstairs window, standing at the edge of the clearing. I looked directly at it. Our eyes met, though I couldn't make out its features clearly. I felt something pass between us, an acknowledgement, a connection. I knew immediately I had made a terrible mistake. The rules aren't just precautions, they're a binding agreement. As long as I follow them, it stays outside. If I break them, the agreement is void. Tonight will be different. Tonight, it will try to get in. My hands trembled as I turned to the next page. October 16th, 1994. It came through the basement last night. I barricaded myself in the pantry, the only room in the house with iron nails in the doorframe. By morning, it had returned to the woods, but it left its mark throughout the house. I've reset the boundary, reinforced the rules, but I know now that it's only a matter of time. Each slip weakens the barrier. Each acknowledgement gives it strength. I closed my eyes, understanding flooding through me. By looking directly at the figure yesterday, by meeting its gaze, I had broken the same rule my uncle had. I had voided the agreement that kept it out. I flipped through more pages, reading frantically now. My uncle described reinforcing the basement door, keeping the radio playing to disrupt the entity's ability to communicate, burning notes it left as a way of rejecting its influence. Each rule served a specific purpose in maintaining the boundary between our world and whatever realm the entity came from. But nowhere did he explain how to restore the agreement once broken. I reached the final written page, dated just 2 weeks before his death, but found no solution, no guidance for my current situation. Defeated, I closed the journal and stood up. As I did, a folded paper slipped from between the back cover and the last page. I unfolded it carefully, recognizing my uncle's handwriting, though more hurried and uneven than the rest of the journal. If you're reading this, the agreement has been broken. The rules no longer bind it. There is only one permanent solution now. The entity must be returned to the woods before sunset on the day it enters the house. Its connection to our world strengthens with each nightfall spent inside. In the basement, beneath the south wall, you'll find a stone box containing what you need. The entity was originally bound to the woods by the first owner of this land. It can be bound again, but the ritual requires blood freely given by the property's rightful heir. I've failed in my guardianship. I hope you succeed where I could not. Robert. I read the note 3 times, trying to absorb its meaning. The entity needed to be returned to the woods today, before sunset, and the tools to do so were in the basement, where the entity had come from, where it might still be waiting. I checked my phone. It was just past noon. I had maybe 6 hours until sunset. 6 hours to find this stone box and figure out how to use its contents to banish the entity back to the woods. I spent the next hour searching the house for anything that might help me. In the kitchen drawers, I found a flashlight that still worked and extra batteries. From the hall closet, I collected a hammer and screwdriver that might help open the stone box. I also found a first aid kit, which I took, knowing that the ritual would require my blood freely given. As the day progressed, the house grew noticeably colder. Shadows seemed to lengthen in corners where sunlight couldn't reach. Twice I heard scratching from inside the walls, like something moving within them. Each sound sent me jumping, but I forced myself to continue preparations. By mid-afternoon, I had gathered all the supplies I thought I'd need. I sat at the kitchen table, eating a can of beans cold from the tin, and tried to work up my courage. The basement door loomed at the end of the hallway, darkness spilling out from the broken entrance like ink. Every instinct told me not to go down there. Whatever had broken through last night had come from the basement. It might still be there, waiting. But my uncle's note was clear. The entity needed to be bound before sunset, and the tools to do so were below. At 4 o'clock, with the sun already beginning its descent, I could delay no longer. I took a deep breath, switched on the flashlight, and approached the basement door. The stairway beyond was pitch black, untouched by the afternoon light filtering through the house's windows. From below came a sound, something large shifting in the darkness, wood creaking under weight. My flashlight beam trembled as I directed it down the steps, illuminating only the first few wooden treads before the light was swallowed by the darkness. With my uncle's flashlight in one hand and the hammer in the other, I placed my foot on the first step. The wood groaned under my weight. The shifting below stopped instantly, as if whatever waited was now listening, aware of my presence. I took another step down, and another. The air grew colder with each foot of descent, my breath forming small clouds in front of my face. The flashlight beam seemed to weaken the deeper I went, barely penetrating the unnatural darkness. As the sun began to set outside, casting the last golden rays through the windows above, I continued down into the basement to face what waited below. The beam of my flashlight seemed to disappear into the basement's darkness rather than illuminate it. As I reached the bottom step, I swept the light across what should have been a confined space matching the foundation's footprint. Instead, the basement stretched before me like a cavern, far larger than physically possible. My light caught glimpses of stone walls that appeared to retreat further the longer I looked at them. The air hung heavy with the smell of damp earth and something else, a musty, organic scent that reminded me of rotting leaves and stagnant water. "South wall," I whispered to myself, remembering Uncle Robert's instructions. I moved cautiously across the dirt floor, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the silence. The darkness seemed to press against my skin, almost tangible in its weight. My flashlight beam weakened with each step, as if the darkness were consuming the light itself. Something scuttled in the corner beyond my vision. I froze, listening. The sound didn't repeat, but I felt watched, observed from every shadow. The south wall looked no different from the others, rough stone rising from dirt floor to wooden beams above. I ran my hand along its surface, feeling for anything unusual. Near the center, my fingers caught on a stone that protruded slightly. I pushed, pulled, then tried sliding it sideways. It moved with a grinding sound, revealing a small cavity behind. Inside sat a box made of dark iron, roughly the size of a thick book. Its surface was etched with symbols I didn't recognize, spiraling patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. A simple latch held it closed, no lock. As I reached for it, the temperature dropped. My breath clouded in front of my face. Something moved behind me, a shuffling sound followed by what might have been breathing. I didn't turn around. Instead, I grabbed the box and backed away toward the stairs, keeping the wall to my side. The weight of the box surprised me, heavier than its size suggested. I clutched it to my chest with one arm, keeping my flashlight aimed ahead with the other. The stairs appeared farther away than I remembered, the darkness between me and them almost solid. My back bumped against something cold and yielding that shouldn't have been there. I bolted forward, taking the stairs two at a time, not looking back even when I heard something following. A wet sound of movement on the steps behind me. I burst through the broken basement door into the hallway, slamming it shut despite its damaged state. It wouldn't hold, but the gesture felt necessary. Sunlight still streamed through the windows, though it had taken on the golden quality of late afternoon. I had maybe an hour before sunset. In the kitchen, I placed the iron box on the table and tried to calm my breathing. The box seemed to absorb the light around it, its metal surface appearing matte black from some angles and deep blue from others. I unlatched it carefully. Inside, nestled in what looked like very old velvet, lay 6 flat stones, each about the size of my palm. They were smooth river rocks, their surfaces etched with the same spiraling symbols as the box. Beneath them was a yellowed parchment, the original property deed, dated 1891. At the bottom of the deed, a paragraph written in faded brown ink caught my attention. The boundary must be maintained. The stones mark the corners. What walks in the woods must stay in the woods. Also inside was a folded map of the property, with 6 X marks indicating positions along the property line. A small knife with a wooden handle lay beside it. The ritual would require my blood. Uncle Robert's note had been clear about that. Blood freely given by the property's rightful heir. I took a deep breath, gathered the stones into a small canvas bag I found in the kitchen drawer, and tucked the knife into my pocket. The map I studied carefully, memorizing the locations marked. Outside, the sun hung low over the tree line. Long shadows stretched across the yard, and the air held the stillness that comes before twilight. I stepped onto the porch, scanning the edge of the woods. The figure stood watching me from between 2 pine trees, a dark silhouette more defined than before. I could make out the suggestion of shoulders, the shape of a head, but no features. It remained perfectly still as I descended the porch steps. My heart pounded as I walked across the yard toward the first marked spot on the map, the northwest corner of the property. The figure tracked my movement, its form seeming to lean forward with interest. I kept my eyes mostly averted, glancing at it only peripherally. At the first spot, I knelt and removed 1 stone from the bag. The symbol etched into it seemed to catch what remained of the sunlight, gleaming slightly. I placed the stone on the ground, then hesitated, knife in hand. The cut stung as I drew the blade across my palm. Blood welled up, bright red against my skin. I let several drops fall onto the stone, watching as the liquid seemed to sink into the rock rather than pool on its surface. The symbol flared briefly, then faded back to normal. From the woods came a sound like wind through leaves, though the air remained still. The figure took a step backward, its form becoming less distinct at the edges. I moved to the next location, the western edge of the property. With each stone I placed, each drop of blood I gave, the figure retreated further, becoming hazier, less substantial. By the 5th stone, placed at the southeast corner as the sun touched the horizon, the entity was barely visible, a smudge of darkness against the gathering twilight. The final stone had to be placed at the northeast corner, completing the circle. My hand throbbed from the repeated cuts, but I pushed through the pain. As I approached the last marker, I felt resistance in the air, as if walking against a strong current. The temperature dropped sharply, my breath fogged in front of me. The figure stood directly opposite me now, just beyond where I needed to place the stone. Though still featureless, its posture conveyed a desperate urgency. For a moment, I felt a strange sympathy for it. Whatever this thing was, it had been bound to this place for more than a century. "I'm sorry," I said, though I wasn't sure why, "but you don't belong here." I placed the final stone on the ground and let my blood, freely given, fall upon it. The symbol glowed, brighter than all the others had. A current seemed to run through the ground, connecting all 6 stones in a circle. The figure shuddered. Its edges blurred, then began to unravel like smoke in wind. It reached toward me with an arm that stretched and distorted unnaturally, but it couldn't cross the boundary created by the stones. Instead, it dissolved further, tatters of darkness melting back into the deepening shadows of the forest until nothing remained. The moment it vanished completely, a change swept through the property. The air lightened, becoming easier to breathe. The unnatural cold dissipated. Even the trees seemed to stand straighter, no longer leaning menacingly toward the house. I walked back to the house slowly, exhaustion setting in now that the immediate danger had passed. The last light of day faded as I reached the porch. Inside, I found the house transformed. The destruction remained, overturned furniture, scattered belongings. But the atmosphere had changed completely. The oppressive weight that had hung in every room was gone. I wrapped my cut hand with gauze from the first aid kit, then began straightening up the kitchen. The radio caught my eye. I plugged it in and turned the dial. Clear music filled the room. No static, no cutting out, just a simple country song playing without interruption. In the hallway, I examined the basement door. Though still damaged from the entity's violent exit, it now hung properly on its remaining hinge and closed completely. I made a mental note to repair it properly tomorrow. I moved through the house, room by room, feeling the difference in each space. In the living room, my uncle's rules still sat on the coffee table where I'd left them days ago. They were no longer necessary. The entity was back where it belonged, bound to the woods by the boundary stones. In my uncle's bedroom, I found a blank journal on his desk. I took it downstairs and sat at the kitchen table. On the first page, I wrote the date and a simple entry. Today I reset the boundary. The entity is contained. The stones must be maintained. I understand now why Uncle Robert chose me. This land needs a guardian, someone who will respect its history and protect its future. I accept that responsibility. I closed the journal, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't expected. This strange house with its dark history was now my home. The burden my uncle had carried for 20 years was now mine. But unlike him, I wouldn't be alone with my knowledge. I had his journal, his experience to guide me. As I prepared for bed in the guest room, unable to face sleeping in my uncle's room just yet, I thought about the changes I would make. The house needed repairs, the garden could be restored, the rules could be packed away. But the boundary stones would always need tending, and the woods would always need watching. I fell asleep that night to the sound of clear music playing softly from the kitchen radio, no longer afraid of what might come tapping at my window in the darkness.